Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Women in Safety, Fire and Security. This session is broadcast by SHP and IFSEC Global, part of Informal Markets. My name's Charlotte Gagan. I'm Event Manager for SHP, IFSEC Global and Safety and Health Expo, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. I've got just a couple of announcements before we start. Firstly, the buttons at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn more about today's speakers, also download various related resources and share the webinar on LinkedIn. Secondly, this webinar is designed to be interactive, so please do get involved. You'll see there's a Q&A widget which you can use to submit your questions to the speakers. So pop your questions in there as and when they come to you, and we'll get through as many of them as we can, most of them towards the end of the discussion. And we've also got a few polls for you to take part in, which we'll use to help frame our discussion. And I'm going to ask you to answer the first one now. So in a moment, you're going to see a question pop up on your screen. Please answer it, and we will come back to the results later. Finally, a full recording of today's webinar will be emailed to you within the next couple of days so that you can listen back on demand. And you can also download a CPD certificate using the buttons at the bottom of your screen. So if you want one, make sure you get it today before you log off. Now, on to today's discussion. We're going to discuss reasons for and examples of initiatives to support gender equality in our professions. Joining me are 4 speakers, each of whom is involved in running a women's network within their field. And I'm going to ask each of them to briefly introduce themselves. Letitia, do you want to start us off?
Hi, thank you and welcome. So I'm Letitia Emiana. I'm currently the Global Security Capability Manager at Unilever, and I'm also the UK Chapter Chair for ASIS UK. Obviously, my interest here is really about making sure that we can demonstrate at senior levels and get more advocacy across the minority sectors that we engage with.
Fantastic, thank you. Heather?
Hello, good morning everyone. It's lovely to be here. I'm Heather Beach and I run a wellbeing strategy and training organisation called Healthy Work Company. But I actually started Women in Health and Safety when I was part of the same team that Charlotte is part of. We recognised that there were a lot of women in the profession somewhere, but I just couldn't see them at any networking events. So we started a network and it really exploded, and we've got about 3,500 members now. And I still run it as part of my my current business with a committee that's taken from around the industry. And I'm really happy to see what discussion emerges today.
Thank you, Heather. Andrea?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Andrea White, and I am a fire engineer, an incorporated engineer with my own consultancy, AW Fire. And a bit like Heather, really, I established last year a group that I wish I'd had 20 years ago when I started in the industry. So I founded the Women in Fire Engineering Networking Group, with the strapline to support, develop and inspire women in the industry. And yeah, we now have over 650 members after just a year.
Thank you. And Fiona?
Hi everyone, I'm Fiona Perrin. I'm a safety professional, so I'm a chartered fellow with IOSH, and I'm also a fire engineer. So I've been involved in Heather's Women in Fire group since almost it began, and I now chair Andrea's Women in Fire Engineering networking group as well. I have for a long time mentored women in particular, knowing that they need that, extra bit of support, whether it's through imposter syndrome or, just needing someone to reach out to. It's quite funny. I sort of compare the fire industry to what health and safety was 20 years ago. And I think there's, still a long way to go.
Thank you. And as I said, I'm Charlotte Gagan. I'm responsible for content, brand strategy and sales on SHP, IFSEC Global and Safety and Health Expo. And as part of that, I've been very much involved in the Women in Health and Safety Network with Heather on and off for about 5 or 6 years. And I've always thoroughly enjoyed working with that group. And for me, I've particularly enjoyed trying to help women to amplify their voices. That's enough about me. You can find out more information about all of us speakers by clicking on the speaker widget on your screen, where you can access our bios. Now, my first question is a big one. Does gender bias and discrimination exist in our professions? And I actually want to start by asking you, the listeners, a question about this. And I'm going to send it to you now, and we will come back to it in a few minutes. And in the meantime, I'm going to pose a question to Letitia. Letitia, can I ask you to share your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I find this really tough to answer, in all honesty, because I'm a firm believer discrimination does exist. And I believe it just exists because that's just how humans are built. We've got unconscious bias. We've been raised certain ways. So yes, wholeheartedly, discrimination exists. And I think where I wanted to also explore in this conversation was the different types of discrimination that can present themselves, because one of the things that I have noticed when I've reflected on this question in preparation for this webinar is that I think maybe as I've grown more senior in my capacity in physical security, I haven't witnessed the blatant over sexism, gaslighting, as much as I feel I did 20 years ago. So I've really felt like we've come huge steps, and I'm so positive that we have. I'm not saying we haven't. But as a result of this, and I'm also a big sports advocate because I'm also a female football coach. And when I went back and really did a bit more research on this, I'm a little bit disheartened that actually it's still quite prevalent in certain sectors within the physical security domain. And so therefore, in order to help, I think, people maybe on the call is, it is recognized that it happens, but maybe this is what this discussion is going to help us bring out today about strategies and ways that we can support each other and continue on this journey to move forward in all our different areas that we operate in.
Yeah, and Fiona, I know you've got some comments on this one too.
Yeah, I actually, in preparation for this, I actually posted this exact question to our Women in Fire Engineering networking group. And I was really surprised by what I got back. I think ladies from all levels, Letitia, especially in the fire industry, are experiencing, whether you call it gender bias or microaggressions or outright discrimination. I'm looking at my cheat notes here, but we had a lot of biases around things like when meetings were held, expectations to attend breakfast events or evening events when it clashed with childcare. I think that was a really big key factor for many people. I know it's an issue I've been dealing with myself. And then the sort of the microaggressions where perhaps people naturally turn to a male colleague to ask a question, or we had females being reported that they were leading on projects but continually left off emails, invites, emails being directed to the wrong person. And one interesting anecdote from one of our members, she said that this was repeatedly happening and her opinions not being taken into consideration. And they started using then a generic fire engineering email address and signature. And she said it stopped happening then. And if people didn't know if it was a male or a female sending the email, she got much better response from it, which is great. She's found a coping strategy, but it's sad that that's still happening in our profession. I think safety professionals, we've come a long way. Heather might know the better statistics, but I think we're about 22 or 25% female in IOSH. We're only 7% females in the IFE, and so many people, still having those, conversations around, being asked if they're there to take the notes or make the cups of tea. So yeah, actually I was on a call the other day, and the person that was chairing it was just like, okay, we're just waiting for the fire engineer to join us. And I'm like, hello. So yeah, it happens a lot. But that's why we have these sessions, and I'm also a big believer in the need to educate, because some of these biases, I don't even think they realise they're doing it, and I think we all have an obligation to speak about it, stand up for each other, and not just support women, but also to call out these things when they do happen.
Yeah, thank you. And I can see from the poll results that listening today, we've got roughly 80% of listeners are female, roughly 20% male, 1% non-binary. And I can also see that of the women listening, around 65% feel they've experienced discrimination, around 20% say they haven't, and around 15% say they're not sure. I have also included a poll question to ask if there are any men listening who feel that they've experienced discrimination because of their gender at work. And I can't actually see any results. So I don't know if that's either it's not pushed, probably I'm going to just push it again. You might see that question pop up on your screen, or it just hasn't had any answers yet. But it's interesting, and one of the PDFs in the resources section of the webinar is a selection of 20 anecdotes about discrimination from women within our networks. Some of them are taken from interviews that I did a couple of years ago, and the ones that I've included in there stood out to me at the time and have stuck with me. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of them now, particularly stuck with me. One of them, I'll read the quote. I once had a conversation with a male manager who said women don't have the right brains for health and safety. There's another one actually, which I haven't included within the PDF, and it was a woman who was going for a health and safety role within a construction firm. She made it to the final 2 of the interview stage, and then was accidentally copied into an email between the recruiter and the employer, in which she could see that the employer had said they would like to go with the other candidate, and they said it was simply because they'd prefer to have a man in the position. And then you will see that there are several anecdotes within that PDF which follow a similar theme, and it's something that I hear quite a lot and which has already been mentioned in this discussion, about women finding it harder to be heard, being shut down in meetings, overlooked, or having their expertise not be trusted, as you've just highlighted, Fiona. So now, I suppose, moving on to the more positive angle of today's discussion, and I want to talk about the women's networks. And I specifically want to ask what the goal of these networks is. And I'm going to come to a representative of each of the networks now. Starting with Andrea, I think yours is perhaps the youngest network to be founded in this group, and you've told us a little bit about it. But can you give me an overview of what the goal of your network is?
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. So, Women in Fire Engineering Networking Group, established just about a year ago. We got going, and we have a strapline that's supporting, developing, and inspiring. So in terms of support, listening to some of the points that were made earlier, those are sort of frequent comments that I certainly hear. And by the way, great to hear so many men on this webinar today. That's really encouraging. So supporting women and giving them an opportunity to realise that they're not alone. Because certainly before I established this group, I didn't have any other women in my industry on my contacts list. I didn't know any other women. And actually having someone else who can appreciate your perspective and talk to you about certain issues is really, really helpful. I think that's probably, for me, having that sort of support network has been one of the best things about the group. Then development. So we're keen to help women develop further in their careers. As women, we tend to be less confident, don't we? And less willing to put ourselves forward. So we've run several workshops for professional registration and levels of membership application forms, where we do those as a webinar, as a group, over a couple of weeks. I'm a fellow of the IFE and an incorporated engineer, and I believe there are, in terms of women in both of those roles, it's in single figures. So it would be great to see more fellows that are women, and also more incorporated engineers. And then the last one really is to inspire. So I'm particularly keen to raise the visibility of women at speaking events, so exhibitions like FireX or the fire safety event. What we're really keen to do, and what we do now, is partner with the event organisers to try and improve the gender diversity of the speakers, because if you can see it, you can be it. And I think one of the sort of sidelines is sort of helping raise awareness. So, just trying to start these conversations. I certainly, I wrote a LinkedIn post at the weekend and sort of mentioned that I'd Googled, what does a construction manager look like? And every single image was male apart from one. And the female image was on a post that was, I can't remember the exact title, but mistakes that construction managers make. And the entire article had an image of the same woman through it and no men. And, what I was trying to say in the post was, isn't this disappointing? And interestingly, one man came back and sort of pushed back a little bit and said, what about if you Google a nurse? Are we going to have the same issue there? And I tried to be quite polite and said, thank you, really appreciate your comments. But I think, for me, that's mansplaining. And he got a little bit defensive. But actually, we managed through the LinkedIn comments to have quite a good discussion there. And actually, by the end of it, he said, I didn't mean anything. I didn't mean to belittle your comment or anything. So it's interesting that actually some of this bias isn't necessarily intentional. It's about raising awareness and understanding.
Fantastic, thank you. Heather, do you want to come in next and talk about the goals of the Women in Health and Safety Network?
Yes, thank you, Charlotte. And I have to say, it was fantastic hearing Andrea there. I love your supporting, developing, inspiring. We need a strap line just like that. So I think originally when we started the network, for me, it was very much about, we did a survey in SHP magazine. This was about 6 or 7 years ago, and it showed that 19% of the profession were women. And I was, where are they all? I never see them at a networking event. And actually, I found the networking events to be really dire. They were so dull. And so I wanted to create something where there was a forum for women to just meet each other, to know there were other people like them in the profession. So we started out very much about events, and events is still a sort of a real sort of stronghold of what we run. They've mostly been virtual over the last couple of years. We're hoping to have a Christmas party, subject to some legal firms prepared to put some money into it. But it's really fantastic to be able to get together with other women. The topics we started were very similar to what Andrea was talking about, in terms of looking at where women specifically struggle and looking at topics around that. So we had one on networking, for example, because the evidence at the time showed that men were more prepared to go out to do a golf day, for example, and women were not prepared to spend their time on networking because they had to be productive. They had to be seen to be doing things as opposed to out there building their networks. So we had a session on networking in the early days. And now they're much more about topics such as the menopause, we've got one coming up on single parenthood and how that impacts doing your job. But as time has gone on, that's sort of become just part of what we do. The big thing for me is what Charlotte was talking about earlier, and also Andrew's referred to it, which is amplifying women's voices. I got absolutely lambasted 5 years ago, quite rightly, because I was still doing the same sort of job as Charlotte, and I ran a panel debate, which was called Battle of the Ideas. And it was all about the new ideas in safety compared to the old ideas. And I wanted a debate. And so I went and got the guys that were speaking about it. And it was guys. And there were 5 of them. And I had 5 male speakers. And I got so many people saying to me, where are the women? Where are the women? Where are the women? And they were quite right. That was my unconscious bias speaking. And I've had to make a massive effort to get to know women that are senior in this audience, and to create those opportunities for women to speak, for women to write articles. And people like Charlotte have massively facilitated that by really encouraging people to write articles for SHP, really looking at the makeup of the show, making sure there is a good balance between men and women speaking at it. And then the other things that we're doing are, we have done some mentoring schemes in the past. They're really difficult to administer, but they're incredibly valuable for members. And we've also been promoting, for example, moving your profession forward by, for example, becoming CMIOSH, CFIOSH. We've had people speaking about that and supporting women through that. So Clive Johnson, who used to work at Land Security, some of you may know him, he said to me early on, Heather, how will you know you've succeeded? And I still don't know the answer. But what I do know is that I spoke to a recruitment agent when I was in Berlin recently at the EHS Congress, and he said 40% of the senior positions that he'd recently filled were with women. So we're doing something right.
Fantastic. Thank you, Heather. And I can see from the audience polls that roughly 34% of listeners find women's networks useful. 17% say somewhat useful. 1% say not useful. And about 48%, about half, say they haven't been involved in a women's network before. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, and I'm going to ask a question that I have heard asked many times, which is, doesn't having a group that focuses on women in a sector exacerbate the issue? Letitia.
Okay, so I have heard this time and time again, and you know, there are two sides to this perspective, right? I think when I hear that story, I personally am a bit tired of women's networks in a sense, and I'll tell you why. Because I first started off at Lloyds Banking Group as one of the only women, you know, within a male-dominated team, but then started looking across all the other elements of security and seeing how more women there were in that space. And then realizing that there were some commonalities. So we very early doors set up like a women's group there. When I moved on to Amazon, again, because of the nature of the role that I was in, I also recognized the same things were happening. And so I very quickly asked that we put a women in security together at Amazon. But again, these challenges, as I see it, are not uncommon to all minorities. Yes, there are some specific women's challenges, but what I've started to recognize is that across all minorities, there is so much similarity between the topics that need to be discussed and the challenges that everybody's facing. And so therefore, in one hand, it's really important that we focus on women's topics, and there is an avenue and a space to explain what those are and build up the allyship, because I think it is important that we educate through this process too. But I also feel, and why I said I'm a bit tired, is because we're almost preaching to the converted a lot of the time. When you see a topic of women's networks or women's this, you are predominantly going to get the high percentage of attendance already in that space. And I just wonder if that's why you mentioned some statistics there, Charlotte, that maybe that's why they're not of use to some people, because some people, like myself, been around the block, heard it before, you know, a bit tired of the same old topic. And so one thing I wanted to bring out in this question, Charlotte, was also that it's a bit like, you know, products on when you go to the supermarket. Not all networks are the right network for you at any given time. You know, sometimes you have to go and explore different networks to appreciate that there are different ideas, there are different approaches. And so it's good to try other avenues and other associations or other people's perspectives to challenge where you're at. And so where have I got to answering that question, Charlotte? It's probably that, yes, there is a space for women's networks. They're not all the same. We're not always going to be talking about the same topics. But what I am starting to do more of with my ACES capacity is turn up the volume. I'm really now looking to connect all these networks. I'm really looking to connect these experts, just like we've got on the call today, so that we can collaborate more and make sure that we are touching and delivering more for the needs of those that want to connect, educate themselves and develop. Because I think that's where these networks are really helping people. And it's opening the doors and making sure that we're open enough in ourselves to either informally mentor, or if we have got programs, you know, open those doors and show people how to, you know, really take the best of what we've got collectively.
Thank you. And Fiona, I know that you've got some thoughts on this one too.
Yeah, I've been asked quite a few times recently, you know, why do you need a women's network? You know, what about a man's work network? You know, surely it's not needed. And, you know, I always come back to the argument that, you know, if there are so many women, especially in engineering, but in all STEM areas, that leave the profession, whether that's, you know, when they have kids or for various reasons. A lot of women, you know, don't make it into senior roles because of, you know, various issues. But even when we do make it into those senior roles, we're not even getting paid as much as men. So as long as those things still exist and there are barriers for women in the workforce, I absolutely think, there's a need for these women's groups. We ran a little drop-in webinar type thing a few weeks ago. It was bring your lunch, Friday lunchtime. It was meet the committee, and we just had some informal chats. I got so much feedback from people, from the women that attended that session. So sorry, I'm just being disturbed. I'm just busy workplace. So I had so many feedback from women that were attending that event. They said, they just don't get the chance. They work in male-dominated companies. They don't have women that they can just sit around and eat their lunch with and have a bit of a chat about, stuff going on in the world and kids and whatever else we chatted about. So I absolutely believe there's a place for this. And maybe, as we get more diverse, we can start looking at, other avenues. But definitely in the fire sector, we absolutely need it.
And another one of the resources, which is in the in that widget on your screen, has got positive anecdotes about what people within our networks have said that they get out of them. And there was one on there that I particularly liked, which came from a health and safety professional called Anne Gardner-Aston, who's been championing women in health and safety for a number of years. And she said, the issues that affect women in the world of health and safety, whilst improving, still do exist. It's easy to think that because we have a greater presence at speaking events and getting the opportunities to advance our careers, that we can sit back and relax. We know, though, from experience and watching the news, there can be a gradual erosion of equitable conditions when we are looking the other way. We should never be complacent. Creating a strong network that supports all women in health and safety means that we're a powerful lobby. From a UK perspective, things are certainly getting better, but that is not true for some industries or other parts of the world. From a practical perspective, there is still much to be done around amplifying women's voices internationally. And she goes on to say that that's before we even get near PPE that doesn't drag along the ground, risk assessments that reflect women's life stages and the physical implications of these, and the importance of feminine traits in improving a safety culture. And she ended by saying, somebody shut me up before I end up submitting a PhD thesis. So it's quite a long comment, but I felt there was a lot in there that was worth highlighting. Now I can see that the poll has worked. Apologies, I was pressing the wrong button, it seems, but I can see now that we have got answers that have come in for the question asking whether there are any men who feel that they've been discriminated against at work because of their gender. And interestingly, 35% said yes, around 53% said no, and 12% said not sure. So it's interesting. It's perhaps one that we don't talk about as much, but I feel 35% is not a small percentage by any means. And it brings us on to the next part of the discussion, which is something which we've already started to touch on. And it's asking the question about why do we need to have conversations specifically about women? And also, if we're talking about diversity and inclusion, shouldn't we be talking about men as well? And Heather, I'm going to come to you on this one.
So I don't know why I said I'd answer this question, because I hate saying things that people might find difficult to hear, or I hate causing conflict. However, I do think it needs to be said that we are operating in a world where over the last 50 to 100 years, the rules have changed enormously. Men used to go out and do the work, women stayed at home and were reliant on men. We didn't even have a vote till that long ago. And what has changed and shifted over the last 50 years is enormous. And that is a huge amount for us as a society to cope with. It's it has created all sorts of brilliant things, but it's also created some unforeseen consequences, which have made life hard for both men and for women. So, my dad used to go to work, he'd come home, he'd put his case down, my mum would have his dinner ready, she'd have his slippers warmed, and it was a nice life for him. He was happy and she was happy like that. All she wanted was to be a housewife and a mum. I can't imagine living like that. I can't imagine it. But what it has done is created a world where we're all scrabbling around to do so much all the time. We're running houses, looking after children, looking after elderly parents. And whether you like it or not, the majority of that unpaid labour goes to women. So women are still doing the majority of that. It's really interesting. I think it was Andrea originally said that, one of the things that was viewed as discrimination was that breakfast clubs and things after work were seen as discriminatory. Well, why? If the homework is being shared equally between men and women, then that shouldn't be an issue, should it? Or it would be an issue for men as well as an issue for women. But it isn't. It's primarily, not entirely, but it's primarily an issue for women. So that is one thing where women's experience differs greatly from the male experience. The second thing is, it is not a meritocracy. If I hear once, I hear 1,000 times, it's about the best person for the job. But that best person for the job doesn't exist objectively out there. That best person for the job is the person that fits best with you as an organisation, as an individual. And we tend to like people that are like us. We tend to recruit in our own image. Unconscious bias, I suffered from it. I explained earlier when I got these 5 blokes to talk about battle of the ideas. It's absolutely there. We can't deny it. And the fact that sometimes we can't see the right woman is because we're not present to those right women. We've got a load of men around us. So that is something which does uniquely affect women. We need male allies, though. We definitely need male allies involved in the networks. And we've always had 1 or 2 that are quite, very much sort of part of that. And each committee that we've had 1 or 2 male allies as part of that. And it is really, really useful to have those people understand. And then the other thing is that I think there are places where absolutely men need to get together. I'm thinking particularly about men's mental health. Obviously, that's the field that I'm involved in. We've done some work in the network around, gender and mental health. And what we discovered when we ran that webinar was that actually it isn't just about gender and mental health. It's about inclusivity involves allowing everyone to be themselves, and that actually involves them, may involve them seeing other people like them, being, in networks with people like them. So I think that there should be, potentially networks for all of the various, factors that may come into play here. And certainly when we talk about mental health, men deal with, mental health issues differently to the way that women deal with them. And I think they are brilliant when men get together and talk about these things are brilliant. And I personally think that we still need this in health and safety for women specifically, because we do still have an imbalance in there. And you've done some anecdotes about what that looks like, Charlotte, already.
Yeah, and Andrea, I'm going to ask you to come in on this too. Do you see that women face different challenges to men in fire? And are there advantages for women?
Yeah, I think there are some very different challenges. I think one of the things that's probably most pivotal is that our motivations as a generalization are different. We're motivated by different things. So, I'm being, obviously hugely, I'm generalizing hugely, but traditionally men are much more focused on money and position, and traditionally women are much more about quality of life and making a positive difference. That's one huge difference, I would say. I think another thing is we've talked about, without a doubt, sexism, gaslighting, microaggressions, they definitely still exist. I can remember I joined the fire service some 20 years ago, and there was no female uniform. I had men's trousers. The gloves that I wore on my basic firefighters course were too big. They were the smallest they had, and I couldn't actually grip anything because my hands were swimming in these gloves. So I think, even today, trying to find PPE to go out on site that fits a woman is quite challenging. So, just everyday things, I think, are certainly a difference. And then I think, women tend to be people pleasers. And, we might sort of negatively self-sacrifice and put the needs of others before our own. I think potentially that's where we differ from men. And then the confidence issue. So generally, and I always smile when I see someone do it, women won't be the confident ones. You'll have to encourage them to put their voices forward or to speak at an event. And I'm not sure that's the same with men. And I think, if you turn those around, there's some real advantages. Yes, women are people pleasers, but they're caring and they think of others, and that's a positive. So I think for all the negatives, if we just change our mindset a little bit, we can see that those negatives actually have sort of positive aspects to them.
Fantastic, thank you. I can see
I was going to jump in.
Oh, please do so.
Sorry,
yes,
Charlotte. I was just going to another anecdote for you. Just one advantage that women do find themselves having in the fire industry. I was at the fire conference yesterday, and it's the first place or event I've ever been to where there was a queue for the males' toilets and none for the females. So there are advantages.
Thank you. So we've got a lot of questions and comments coming in, and I'm going to ask the speakers one more question or kind of set of questions, and then we'll come on to the audience Q&A. And the final question is a three-pronged one, and you can answer whichever prong of it you wish to. I want to know what you think can be done to support gender equality in our professions. And it's three-pronged because I think we can look at what organisations can do, what managers can do, what individuals can do. So, Andrea, I'm going to come back to you, and you can answer whichever part of it you feel you'd most like to.
Yeah, thank you. So I think I'll raise 2 points because I'm conscious of time. One is that I am keen for people to get a better understanding of other people's situation. I think, my feeling is that a lot of this is unconscious or a lack of awareness. And, as a woman in fire engineering, going into a room of a couple of hundred men and perhaps being the only woman or a handful of women, none of whom I know, it's a difficult situation. Or even in a meeting, a construction meeting, and I'm the only woman there. And I just wonder whether men would, potentially put themselves in the reverse position and find a situation I don't know, go to a mother and toddler club, or, you know, some situation which is a meeting or a gathering full of women, and put themselves in that position and just see how that feels, you know. And I wonder then, having understood that a little more, whether they might, you know, just consciously appreciate that walking into those rooms, you know, I've got vivid memories of being at the door and knowing I'm about to walk into several hundred men in a room, and I will be the only woman. And you know, that's a difficult feeling. And knowing that actually, at best, no one will talk to you. Let's be kind. So I think, you know, if we could raise that sort of appreciation of what it might be like to be the only or the few, that would be great. And then the other point I would say is that, you know, we do need to start challenging on behalf of other people in group settings behaviour that isn't acceptable. And I'm really encouraged, because I have heard some examples recently where men have actually stood up and said that behaviour wasn't acceptable towards my colleague. And I think we are at a point now where we do need to actually stand up and call out that behaviour if we feel it isn't appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Heather, I'm going to come to you next.
So for me, it's very much about that education piece, really. It's about educating everybody on, for me, the big issue is an understanding that we don't live in a meritocracy. You know, our gender, our ethnicity, our economic circumstances, our upbringing, all of those things will give us an advantage or a disadvantage. And it is a disadvantage in most professions to be a woman, not in all, but it's certainly in the professions that we work in. And actually, as Letitia, no, I think, sorry, it wasn't Letitia, somebody just said, actually, let's think about the advantages. If we're, again, being stereotypical about this, when we look at the profession, the health and safety profession, when I joined it in the 1980s and 1990s, it was all about compliance. It was about, you know, a big stick. It was about a clipboard. It was about saying no. And now it's all about engagement. It's all about empathy. It's all about curiosity. It's all about understanding. And some of these qualities are qualities that are often held very strongly by women. I'm not saying it's unique to women. There are many men that are like that too. But in the main, you know, that is sort of the description that you would give to many women. This whole idea of people pleasing and service sort of plays into that. So actually, there are many advantages to hiring women in the safety and health space right now.
Thank you, Heather. Fiona, can I ask for your thoughts on what can be done?
I think there's a few things. I think your question, the first prong to organisations, I think organisations need to actively employ women into leadership roles. And they may need a little bit more of a confidence boost to go for those runs. You know, we are less likely to apply with imposter syndrome and everything. But I'm a big believer in, if you can't see it, you can't be it. So the more women we have in senior roles, they will help support, motivate the younger generation. I also put out a call to our group around kind of tips for women looking to get into the industry or perhaps starting their careers in fire. And the big, probably the most popular thing that came back was to seek out sort of like-minded people, but also to get a mentor. And I'm a big believer in mentors. I've had some brilliant mentors in my career, and likewise I enjoy mentoring more junior people. So they're kind of my two top tips really for organisations and individuals.
Thank you. And finally, Letitia.
So I've made a few notes actually, because just off what everybody's mentioned there, I definitely have noticed a shift between the what, if you like, and the how. So, just 10 years ago, we'd focus on what can you achieve, what are the KPIs, what does success look like? And maybe it's, again, changing, position and role. So I just wanted to reflect on, and I'm coming from a perspective now where I'm senior in my career, but a lot of what I would be advocating is still a challenge, I think, in early career. So I'm going to start with what can people do, individuals do a little bit differently, take a little bit of personal responsibility and ownership to help drive the change as well. Because I do believe organizations are coming on board and doing what they can and what they believe is right to engender positivity. But I also feel that, I think we've brought it up today, speaking up, but being able to feel safe or psychologically safe to speak up as well is really important. So it's a two-way conversation a lot of the time between manager and individual, or what is perceived to be a hierarchical position to a more junior position. But I think it's also important that, the behaviours of both parties are to be curious. Let's be curious about those perspectives. Let's ask more questions. Why is it you feel that way? Why and what has made you believe this? Because I do a lot of informal mentoring because I get scared by the whole idea of formal mentoring. But when I talk to a lot of junior people as well as people of my own peer group, it's all based in fear. We're scared, ultimately. And that's a commonality, I think, particularly in women's groups, the fear of what's going to happen. So what I'd like to just ask anybody that's junior in their career, is how do you stay authentic? How do you speak up? How can you help your psychological safety? But also learn to say no without saying no. These are all skills that I developed over 20 years, and probably because I was a little bit tenacious and a little bit more resilient than other people at the time. But I see these similarities still coming through, and it's all people. I'm not saying it's just women, but because men have imposter syndrome too. The more I speak about this, the more I hear men say, actually, when I go into a room, I'm bloody scared too, but for different reasons, different triggers, different things sit behind that. And why am I telling you that? Because I have asked them the question, what is it? Why is it? But again, it's starting to have that positive effect on being able to be more curious. So I hope I've answered on behalf of the individuals and a little bit on managers, because I think the organisations, particularly the big ones, the big multinationals like my own and the ones that I've worked for, I do see that they're trying to make a difference. But we also have to do, the junior levels and the managers and the middle managers up and help them with their behaviours.
Thank you. So I'm now going to go on to some of the questions that we've got from the audience and comments. And there's a comment here which I found interesting, and this is referring back to when the generic fire email address, which was getting a better response than a female name. And I can see that someone has added a comment saying, I've done the same. I've abbreviated my name to Alex rather than Alexandra for the same reason. Another comment here is, as a health and safety consultant in construction, I agree with Andrea that sometimes this could be an unconscious issue. Having been in health and safety for 30 plus years, things are changing, albeit slowly. But this week I was asked if I wanted an umbrella on a construction site, ... There's a question here that I'm going to put to the group of you. It's from someone who said, I run a small health and safety consultancy, mainly in the construction sector. I would like to bring my daughter into the business, but she is unsure because of the male-dominated industry. What advice would the panel give that I could pass on to her? Any thoughts?
I'm happy to stick something in there. That's okay. So one of the things that I've worked on recently is purpose, because once you know your purpose, you tend to be able to be more resilient, as I've mentioned, one of the things that I'm looking at. And so therefore, again, it's nice to bring, family or friends into an environment because you love it yourself. But I think my question back as a grounding to that person who's really would love clearly to have their daughter involved in something that they enjoy is what is the driver for that daughter, and therefore I believe it's skills over experience. So again, if they have the right skills that can be developed and harnessed and supported, then there should be no reason to fear coming into some of these industries, because I always knew my purpose was to do the right thing, no matter at what cost sometimes. But that has driven me through, because what I'm doing for the greater good, in my perspective, is worthwhile. And that's what keeps me going and keeps me fighting the good fight every day.
I'll jump in, Charlotte, if I may.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, do so.
That's a good question. And actually, the biggest reason that I found men want to talk about gender inequality is because they'll start with, my daughter's thinking of going into engineering and she's experienced some things and she's really not sure it's where she should be. And how do I start having this conversation, and how do we start changing the industry? So I found that an interesting driver, that it appears that it needs to be quite close to home before we're willing to have those conversations. But if that's what it takes, then so be it. I think, Martin, your daughter's concerns, if I can be that strong, are justified, in my experience. And I think it comes down to being realistic and, about understanding that is the reality, and is that something that she's willing to face, and is that something that she will have support to face? Because if she's trying to face that alone, and obviously if she's in your consultancy, then that makes something of a difference. But I think to deny that it will happen is probably unhelpful. I think it's actually more a question of, eyes wide open and, seeing whether it's for her with those challenges attached to it.
Thank you. We're actually coming to the end of the hour. I always expected this would be the case, that we would have so much to discuss and perhaps not quite enough time to cover everything. So I'm going to finish with one final comment here, which is coming from a listener. And then, because we've had so many questions come in, if it's okay with the group of you speakers, what I might do is just send these to you after the webinar and see if you have a chance to answer some of them following the webinar. so that then we can put them back to the audience and they can get some of your insight after. So the final comment that I want to just read aloud is, it's bad in this day and age that women are looked at as not being on the same par as us men. I've worked with a lot of women who I thought were fantastic within their role. Hats off to all you speakers who started groups for supporting women in their industry, which I think is a lovely way to conclude. And with that, I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who's tuned in and submitted questions. Again, sorry we haven't got a chance to get through many at all, but I would do my best to make sure that you get some sort of response to them. And of course, thank you very much to all of our speakers today who I hope everyone will agree have been fantastic and very generous with your time and sharing your insights. Thank you. As I mentioned at the start, if you do want to listen back to anything from today, you can do so with the on-demand link, which will be emailed to you within 48 hours. Please do also feel free to share that link with any colleagues. They'll be able to watch it too. And for more webinars like the one that you've heard today, you can go to the SHP and IFSEC Global webinar hubs by clicking on the link within the resources box of the webinar console, or by going directly to the SHP and IFSEC Global websites.